Welcome, everyone. My name is Veronica Ojurumbe, and I'm the moderator for the session today and the program coordinator at SDS in Canada, which is a national network situated at the University of Waterloo, where we're looking to engage Canada's post-secondary institutions towards the SDGs. Today's conversation is part of the SDG Week Canada. It's a national collaboration between Sustainability Hub at the University of British Columbia, SDSN Canada, and the College and Institutes Canada. And it's an opportunity to rally post-secondary institutions around the SDGs to plan events, commit to action, and spotlight successes towards institutionalizing the SDGs in campus operations. We're hoping to, through this, raise awareness about the SDGs through interdisciplinary learnings and teaching opportunities. As I welcome you to today's session, I would like to acknowledge the history of the land on which we gather, and I invite everyone to reflect on the place from which you're calling or joining us from today and your relationship with that land. SDSN Canada is situated at the University of Waterloo, which is on the traditional territory of the Atawandaran, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on Hunterman Tract, the land granted to 6 nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. The university's active work towards reconciliation takes place across all of its campuses through research, learnings, and community building, and it is centralized within the Office of Indigenous Relations. Acknowledging the land like this reminds us that Canada's achievements are directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples, and that we must all push for transformative act over the coming decades through reconciliation and justice. A quick run through of the agenda today. We're going to be having a conversation with all our panelists for 40 minutes and thereafter open up the floor for questions from our audience. I encourage everyone to please put their questions in the Q&A box as the conversation is going on. You will only have access to the Q&A box and not to the chat box, so make sure that all your questions are succinct and easy and straight to the point. And if you want a particular panelist to respond, please do indicate that in your questions. Just a brief overview of today's topic, which is on innovating in the teaching the Sustainable Development Goals, and in the famous words of an Irish poet, William Yeats, education is not feigning in the power, but lightning of a fire. And this is how I feel when I hear the word innovation, and I want that to be able to ignite some kind of fire in learners to be able to learn more and thirst for more knowledge. And in particular, in meeting the SDGs, it requires an innovative approach in education, and in post-secondary institutions have an important role to play in developing sustainability consciousness among learners. And as educators, to be able to create learning experiences that are meaningful, creative, and transformative, it's important to reflect on our teaching methods and how we can be improved through innovation. So in today's session, as a panel, we'll be exploring the context of teaching, the SDGs, and approaches in teaching using innovative strategies to help improve learning outcomes. With that said, we have an interesting lineup of speakers today that will do more justice to the conversation. And before passing it over to them, if you would like to learn more about our panelists and the great work they're involved in, please visit the registration link to have access to their detailed bios. So today, I'm pleased to welcome Aditi. She's the Educational Development Specialist at University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Alistair Edgar is the Associate Professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. We also have on our panel today Shamta Hunter. She's the Manager of Sustainability Engagement, University of British Columbia. And also on the panel is Candy Ho. She's the University Lead Sustainable Development Goals for Lytton Polytechnic University. Last and definitely not the least is Rosalind Warner. She's a Continuity College Professor at Okanagan College. A big welcome to all our panelists today, and thank you so much for joining us. So I'm really excited to get started. And I know there have been various meanings attached to innovation, but simply put, it's really thinking outside the box and usually felt by creativity and collaboration. And some believe also that involves maybe introducing the latest technology in our classroom, but in the context of teaching and teaching the SDGs in particular, what does innovative teaching strategies mean to you? What do you think this involves? And I'm going to start off with you, Aditi. Please do kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And yes, I'm at the University of Saskatchewan, which is on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis, on the banks of the South Saskatchewan River. And I am a settler on this land. And I have always appreciated the opportunity that Saskatoon offers with its Meewasin Valley Authority. So we have a natural river that runs through the entire city. that is protected from development, and that brings in the word that's in our institution's critical path to sustainability strategic plan, which is Nakati Tamuin, which is to protect and to nurture. And I think about that in terms of sustainability. And when we're thinking about the innovative teaching that we want to bring to the classroom, what are we nurturing? What are we protecting for the greater good of this place and for the longevity of the place? So knowing that we appreciate the natural resources and the natural beauty that we have in Saskatoon, what do we offer that? How do we bring that energy into our classrooms? So in 2021, we asked USask instructors, how do you know when students get it? And that get it was, what do they have? How do they have the skills and abilities necessary to address the planet's greatest challenges? And what we heard was that students were reflective, that they could communicate about their experiences. This is the impact that this had on me. They worked collaboratively with others. They could use tools and technologies in innovative ways, applying what they already knew into novel contexts. They were resilient when facing challenges and were comfortable navigating new contexts, including cultural contexts as well. So when we asked instructors, so now that you know what a student who gets it looks like, what have you done to design that environment, to design the learning experience that helps build these competencies? And what we heard from our educators was that they used teaching practices that supported student choice, both choice within assignments, choice between assignments, that there were activities and assignments that were reflective, that it had components that were evaluated to gain insight about what students got out of an assignment, giving feedback to students and students giving feedback to instructors as well. Faculty that leveraged interdisciplinary learning opportunities, community engaged partnerships, those were teaching practices that resulted in students having the competencies necessary to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I will mention that this relies on faculty and educators who have the capacity and who have those connections in community and relationships. So relationships, our students are supported through our relations.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Aditi. And I think one thing that is important is the reflexive component. And I think that will definitely help students. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts about this as well, Rosalind.
Thank you so much. And it's my distinct pleasure to be calling in from the unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan people here in Kelowna, British Columbia. When the question was put in terms of what is innovative about teaching, one of the first things I kind of thought was, it's easy to think that to be innovative, you have to be new or exciting or different. And really, when I think about it, I think about what works. So innovative actually means things that might be well-established practices, but that are effective and that have been tried and true and tested over time. So an innovation can actually mean something that is effective and that works. For me, the competencies that I think the SDGs bring to the table have to do more with connection, with integration, with creating an insight in understanding how a system works as a whole, as opposed to taking bits of that system and analyzing it. So the word analysis, as I often mention to my students, actually means to take things apart. And although each of us maybe identifies with one particular SDG, or you might be working on particular aspects of it, I really think that the power of the SDGs comes from the way that they are connected together and that they are indivisible. And to pick up on the point that Aditi made about connection and about choice, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Challenge, which is a challenge that youth engage in from roughly grade 9 to grade 12, where they conceive of a project to bring to life one or more of the SDGs. And what they find is that they often choose more than one. And to think about it in terms of a year-long project, they're designing, they're evaluating, they're presenting their project at a big finale night. It becomes a great community event. Everybody is not only learning about the SDGs, but they're also getting the gratification and the validation of knowing that their ideas matter. That they're recognized by the community. And they eventually go on to do great things with these projects. Almost all of them come to fruition, and many of them are continuing on to this day. Just to give you a sample, one team set up a Thrifty Thursday in their school. So they asked students to donate older clothes and then to exchange clothes for other ones. Access C designed a website where people with disabilities could find supports in the community. And they actually went into businesses and measured how wide their hallways were to see if they would be able to fit wheelchairs. Books for Books worked with a development organization to make notebooks and to send the proceeds to Uganda so that students in Uganda could purchase books. Operation Take Two set up a container plastic recycling facility at their school grounds. And they also appeared on national television on Dragon's Den to showcase their project.
Oh, wow.
So this is
That's
just
interesting. Yes.
yeah, just a
Very
small sampling, but there's a lot of things when it comes from the students themselves that really makes a difference.
makes a difference, and I totally agree with that, Rosalind. And to your point about when you think about innovation, doesn't necessarily mean adding something new or bringing something new. Why not use what you already have and existing structures? And so thank you so much for that, Rosalind. And Alistair, to you, what does innovative teaching strategy mean?
Thanks very much. I'll quickly mention that I'm speaking from the same territories as our moderator. I won't repeat the land acknowledgement, but ditto. And without jumping to the third question that we're going to talk about, innovative strategies for me means a number of things. I teach in political science. So that's my audience, if you will, at the Wilfrid Laurier University and up to master's and PhD level at the Balsillie School of International Affairs. So it differs depending on the audience. A very practical sense, and maybe I'll come back to this later. My second year students are really that's the first time they get to do international relations, not the Plato to NATO introductory kind of courses. And 99% of them have never heard of the SDGs. So part of innovation at that level, at any rate, is introducing the topic to them, and walking them through the difference from MDGs to SDGs, the fact that the SDGs are not in declining or increasing order of importance, that one doesn't mean the first and 17 the 17th. The innovative part of teaching at that second year level is actually, and the students often complain about this, not giving them slides, giving them readings, because if we gave them slides, they read the slides and then they think they have to repeat the slides. What I say to them is, we're moving you past just reading. We're now assuming you're doing the reading, and we're asking you to say, what do you think and why? So not just the content, but as well as Rosalind mentioned, the critical thinking component, which is very new for second year students. Obviously that gets ramped up third year, fourth year for me. The easy ones to teach are master's degree. We have a professional program in international public policy, and there they've got all the background. They're mostly writing policy briefs, because most of them are looking to go into Natural Resources Canada or Environment Canada. They're going into those kind of arms of federal government or provincial government, or sometimes municipal government as well.
Thank you so much for that, Alistair. And I think it's what's important that you're helping students apply themselves, thinking outside of the box. And to you, Shamta, let's have your opinion on this. Do you think innovation really means thinking outside the box, as Rosalind and Alistair have projected?
Thanks, Monique. I agree with everything that has been said so far. I'm joining you today from the Musqueam territory here in Vancouver, BC. We know that the SDGs framework calls for transformative agenda that calls for innovative ways to not only understand the problems and the issues, but also think creatively about the solutions to achieve the goals. I think, yes, I agree. Simply put, it's about trying something that you haven't tried before, experimenting, failing, learning from your students, but also from your colleagues, including students as partners, as co-creators in the teaching and learning process, and team teaching or co-planning and co-facilitating. So I teach in the teacher education program and also facilitate a leadership program with the UBC students here. And a lot of that student input comes, like I learn a lot from when I bring students into the teaching and learning process. Also, lots of the issues that are not, I wouldn't say lost, most of the issues that are related to the SDGs are labeled as wicked problems, which means really evolving our understanding from the interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary, where disciplines merge to form something entirely new or novel ideas or new ways of doing things that is kind of moving beyond that business as usual or traditional modes of teaching and learning, which means embedding inquiry-based transformative learning strategies that call for deeper learning and exploring and connecting really to our values while developing the competencies that have been mentioned by my colleagues here today. I would also add that we also need to maybe start thinking about moving beyond this construct and this holding pattern that we are in about sustainable development. I think we are doing sustainable development really well. We are experts at doing this. We need to move beyond that construct to really think about where do we go to really think about that achieving sustainability. And there are different ways of defining that as well.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that, Shamter. And I think it's innovative as well if you're learning from your students, as you say. I think learning is a two-way street, and I think both as educators we can also learn a lot from our students and vice versa. And then over to you, Candy. Please let's have your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Morenike. Hi, everybody. I'm joining you all today from the shared traditional territory of the Coast Salish First Nations, which are Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen. So warm welcome from here. Great question. So when I think of innovative teaching with the SDGs, I think of the idea, I like the phrase unlikely partnerships. So finding creative ways to work and collaborate with one another that people haven't thought of before, which is consistent with what my colleagues have said, and finding ways to connect and integrate the SDGs into various disciplines to generate new insights and interpretations and bring in new to those disciplines. So within my field in career development, I teach a senior career capstone course, and I work with students in their final years where they come into this course with a career or aspiration in mind. So wanting to apply to the UBC, medical school, wanting to go into their first time for full-time position, wanting to apply for graduate school, you name it. So we work with an array of students, but we also give them the reality that, these are very competitive. And what happens if, your original aspiration isn't something that's feasible for you? So when I introduce the SDGs into the curriculum, I ask them, think about the world that you want to live in. What does that look like? What are your skills, talents, and experiences that you have that you feel can contribute to advancing these wicked problems, as Shanta has said? And how do they help you contribute, make a contribution to our society? So instead of saying, on an individual level, what role do they want to play? How do they want to serve the world that they see? So being able to connect that has been a game changer in terms of, for my own pedagogy in teaching the course, but also helping other faculties realize we don't all have to be experts in the SDGs to make change, to advocate for better education, enhancing sustainable development for all of us within our institutions and also within our community. The second part of the question is, what does that involve? So creativity, being able to share your vision. And sometimes it could be tentative, a half-baked idea, but that's where the co-creation is so beautiful, and inviting other people to enrich your own thinking, learn, fail, and try again. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Thank you so much for that, Candy. And I think it has been a very good conversation. And I think two things that stand out for me is the creativity component and the collaborative component, and getting students to apply themselves. You're getting them to see the real world, how to solve wicked problems, as Candy had said. And I think that's very creative and innovative on as its own. And so just going on to next question with, in a room filled with a large percentage being educators, something that might come up on their mind is, how then do we start off or create a culture of innovation in our classroom? What are you saying? What do I have, within hand's reach where I can really just start being creative or start being innovative? And at this time, I'm going to start with you, Shamter, just kind of giving a sense of how do you create that culture within the classroom? How do educators start off? And what kind of learning outcomes would this help bring about? So Shamter?
Yeah, amazing. Good question. I kind of will go back to engaging students as co-creators and co-learners and really trying to bring that sense of community of learners in the classroom, that we are all part of this equally. And I'm not I'm not a teacher per se. I usually try and bring myself as a facilitator into the room. So for example, at the beginning of my course, I open up the syllabus to students and kind of really get them to express their expectations and their ideas of how do we achieve these learning outcomes. Being open to changing your assignments, for example. So really, and it does take some time to be able to get to that point where you are kind of opening up to completely change your syllabus or assignments. Being open to deviating even in the class and in the lesson plan of the day, and taking those directions and signals from students. So I've done that, and those has been like really good conversations and discussions with students. Transformative learning kind of really highlights this importance of challenge and support. So how do we challenge the students, but also offer that support really through when we are discussing all of these goals and issues that are related to it. So I've found that compassion and kindness informed pedagogies can really inform our teaching and learning design to cultivate that learning community in the classroom that really enhances that culture of innovation and creativity. So centering justice in the curriculum, and we have had through discussions and dialogue on relating to the issues that are related to the goals. Really embedding that learning through community-based projects, project management and facilitation skills, really building those competencies. And I would just mention one more thing about this, and this has come up quite a bit in my discussions with the teacher candidates. It's about this idea of holding two contradictory ideas in your head. And that's the competency that really comes up again and again. And I will also kind of bring up this idea of two-eyed seeing, and how do we bring that ideas and really processes of thinking in the classroom. And I do that. One example that I do it through is the discussion of socio-scientific issues that are related to the SDGs. And that in my teacher candidate in classrooms really helps build those understandings.
Thank you for that, Shamter. And at this point, I would like to quickly pause and just ask audience, please keep your questions coming in the Q&A box. And when the floor is open, we would respond to each of them. So I'm just going to go to you, Candy, and thank you for that, Shamter, as to building a culture of innovative culture in the classroom. What would your take be on that?
Yeah, I think it's no surprise. We live in an increasingly complicated world where answers are no longer black and white. They're wicked problems. They require interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches. So multiple ways to look at the same issue to generate different interpretations and to identify root causes. And I think SDGs are perfect for that. So if you take the time to look at their targets and indicators and to see how those global issues are connected, we know that working toward one will help the others progress as well. But the challenge here is we live in a world where resources are finite. So we also need to consider how do we best utilize and prioritize our resources to generate the most meaningful outcome. And not everybody would agree what is best and what is most meaningful, right? So that's where we need to look at all angles. And I would say from the teaching and learning standpoint, part of this is, again, providing providing space for students to feel comfortable to learn and fail and to learn from failing. For me, in my classroom, this looks like there is no wrong answer, no curiosities too small, no questions too big, and only different angles of interpretation. So and concretely, we're in a semester system where we look at 13 weeks or so interacting with students. So I think like for the last couple of years, I've done away with deadlines. They're not dead. We have target dates instead, because everybody learn and progress differently. And I still have found that students complete their assignments within the most reasonable amount of time and not waiting until the end, because we give them the time and space to do that. And we get higher quality assignments as a result. So giving students the space and time would be my key message.
Thank you for that, Candy. And I think it's quite important to give them the spirit and space as well to express themselves through their assignments. I think that's very important. And I'm just going to go to you, Alistair, in terms of building a culture of innovative culture in your classroom. What would your take be on that?
Sure. Well, I definitely agree with what people have already said, in the sense of I will tell my students at all levels, second year up to PhD, there aren't bad questions. There may be better or worse answers to some of those questions, but there are no bad questions, as long as they're relevant to the course, at any rate. There are no bad questions to ask. So I really want them to, if they don't know something, feel free to ask. Or if they think they know something, feel free to ask. Or if they know something, still feel free to ask about it. Because we'll, again, have students with a wide range of different backgrounds. You know, Laurier is not the biggest university in the world, and we have a relatively small pool of students, but we still have a very diverse group of students with a very diverse range of experiences, including new Canadians, if you will. And now Ukrainian refugees and Afghan refugees coming in as well. So I want them all to feel like they can ask anything. That's one key thing. In terms of trying to encourage creativity, what I've started to do over the last several years is suggest to them not running a Model UN. Frankly, we don't have the time and resources to run a multi-day Model UN in all of our classes, but to take a role. When they're going to write a paper for me, think that you are representing a government, your government, or your home government if you've come from elsewhere, or a non-government organization or an international organization. Put on a different hat, not you, the student. Try to think of what that hat would be and what that person would be interested in and why. And that can drive them to get out of the classroom in their heads a little bit and take different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alistair. And yeah, over to you, Rosalind.
Wow, yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting conversation. Just to pick up on Shamta, Candy, and also what Alistair said about asking questions and, you know, living in this complex world that we live in. Shamta, especially when touching on finding that balance between challenging and support, and thinking, Candy, about those problems and holding those two ideas in your mind. This is the kind of creative thinking that we're going to need, frankly. And if we're going to make any headway on some of these really difficult issues and problems, we need to know what questions to ask, not to just be given the answers, but to know how to learn the ways to solve those. What are the processes that we need to solve those? When I think about creativity, I always remind my students that creativity is not just about freedom. It's not just about, well, there's a universe of choices. I think sometimes people get overwhelmed with the number of choices that we have and the number of times that things are turned back on us to like make a decision. The SDGs can be overwhelming in that sense. I mean, there's 17 of them. There's potentially more. You can always add more, right? And so what I always emphasize is that being creative is not about freedom or having many choices. It's about knowing the limits and working within those limits. So it's freedom, but it's also freedom with discipline. And it's the disciplined thinking, the critical thinking that you bring to it, which actually allows you to be creative. So again, it's one of those sort of contradictory ideas, but it's the discipline and the structure that brings the creativity. I'll just briefly talk a little bit about what we do in the classroom. And one of the things we do is to try to identify how two SDGs might work together or might work at cross purposes. So for example, I will ask a team leader to come in, research two SDGs, and speak to the group about how those SDGs are connected. I want to create a cycle of teaching and learning so that you're not just there to be a passive learner, but you are there to teach other people. Like the best way that I've learned is through teaching. And so I learn the material and I understand the material the best when I'm communicating it to other people. And so I try to make sure that students in my class get the opportunity to practice that skill of teaching other people. And so it becomes a cycle. I'm learning, I'm teaching, other people are learning from me, and then they are teaching others.
Yeah.
So that's using this workshop, and I can say a bit more about it if people have questions.
Yeah.
This workshop format works really well in my class.
Thank you for that, Rosalind. And I think it's quite important to create, I like the term, the cycle of teaching, the cycle of learning. It creates that kind of positive esteem in any student, actually, when they know that other students are learning from them, and it kind of gives them that boost to keep learning, keep seeking, keep applying themselves. And I think it's that's quite key. So over to you, Aditi. Let's hear your thoughts on creating that culture of innovation.
Yes, there's been so many good ideas shared already.
Yes.
I'll bring it back to relationships. One thing that we've done here is started a faculty fellowship. So we have 6 educators who've been together now for almost a year, and they've been able to have, we've given them some more support and training, but they've also been able to rely on each other and have conversations about their teaching practice, be able to reflect together, get feedback from each other. And that's been really empowering. These were faculty who would not have identified as sustainability leaders beforehand. They were novices in sustainability who were motivated to pursue high impact teaching. And the significant shifts that they have observed, I think, in their teaching is what motivates me and what I see as innovative. I kind of like what Rosalind was describing, you need to know your constraints. It's almost like you need to know what the box is so that you can go outside the box. So that's been really nice to see how the fellows have worked towards that. One example is that one was really struggling, saying, I want to do this community project, but I don't know how I'm going to get all my students in a pandemic time to connect with different organizations. And then another fellow said, well, what if you brought the community in? So bringing the world into the classroom, helping students meet learning outcomes by providing them opportunities that are scaffolded, that are targeted in the classroom in a beginning level course before they go out into practicums later on in their course, or in their program. So designing experiential learning that meets the students where they're at.
Thank you so much for that, Aditi. And it's important. I like when you said bring the world into the classroom. That kind of just opens up your mind to possibilities that you never have thought about in addressing these wicked problems. And so thank you so much to all panelists. And it was very engaging discussions. And I'm sure we have some questions already in the Q&A box. Please keep putting your questions in. Please keep sending in your questions, and we would respond to it. So now it's time for the Q&A, and I'm just going to be starting off with a question that just says, how are universities being able to measure their impact and contribution to the fulfillment of the SDGs? Have they been able to do it so far? And if so, how? Can you describe their approach? So anyone can just take a jab at this question. In terms of measuring the SDGs, have you started doing that at your university or in your college, or have you heard about anyone that has started doing it? And then you can just point them to that example. Go ahead, please, Alistair.
Thanks. I was waiting to see, because other people are perhaps more professional in their approach to these. But so I look at this from the outside. My university, is part of its 2018 to 2022, but now continuing sustainability plan, integrated the SDGs into that. So the university, the senior administration, if you will, includes reporting on how all of its activities relate to the SDGs. and they can pick particular targets and indicators. At the Balsillie School, we have a number of more specific programs, if you will, or encouraging. Let's travel less, do more things online. How does that connect to air quality? How, our carbon footprints? And we have to report on all of these. If we're running events, we have to report on the carbon footprint or carbon offset for those events. So we've got a range of, I guess, from big strategic things for the university down to the graduate programs and particular research clusters and individual faculty members' research projects, reporting on those. So I guess from macro to micro, we've got all of those things. And I know our business school, I can't speak on their behalf. I'm not part of them. Seems like an alien world to me. But they have incorporated a UN Global Compact principles for responsible management education, GC Prime, into all of their activities as well. So I guess you could say we've got a range of different things from macro to micro.
Good, good point, Alistair. Thank you. And this question is directed to you, Shamter. Regarding students and helping them create assignments, how do you grade them? And is it a collaborative process as well in terms of grading their assignments?
That's a good question. So when I've opened up my class at the beginning, to get some input from students, mostly I've seen there is no huge changes that student wants to make. Like they're really happy with the way the things are set up mostly. What happens is there are little tweaks usually they want to make, like, maybe the deadline needs to change, or, there's some flexibility around that, and we kind of negotiate that. Maybe I'm asking for too many details and they want to do this. So there are little tweaks here and there. In terms of assessment, what I find really effective is integrating student feedback as they are going through the process of designing their assignments. And that has been really effective for students to come up with the assignment. Maybe it's a draft form. They come to the class, they present it to their peers, they receive feedback, and then they are able to adapt it and make it better, or whatever it is, or make changes. And maybe sometimes I've incorporated 2 feedbacks if it's a bigger assignment. So, and I think that has been really effective. I do some peer assessment, but I usually try and call them peer feedback rather than assessments, because then that makes it really a collaborative approach between the students.
Thank you so much for that, Shamter. And I know we had mentioned student getting it. And I think this question is open to anyone. How do you know your students are getting it? Is it by their receptiveness of the classroom, of the innovation you have already integrated? How do you know they get it? Is it by, so I'm really curious to know anyway. So this is really an open question. Anyone can take a swap at this one.
I would just say that when in the questions that they end up asking, to pick up on what Alistair said, if the questions that they're asking are moving the dialogue forward or moving the discussion forward, and then they're operating within those parameters, and they're learning. I mean, asking students what we should be asking, I think, is one of the best things we can ask on an exam or a test, right? Others might have ideas.
Candy, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'll also add 2 things. When I can see them transfer what they're learning in class in saying, hey, do you think that we might be able to mobilize one of the SDGs that we've been studying in class into a recycling program at our campus? Or being able to advocate to my instructors that we need to introduce the SDGs in these classes as well. When they start to see the connections and they're coming to you to say, do you think those are possibilities, that tells me that the learning has become alive. And I don't want to forget that we likely spend one semester with them, 13 weeks, that I get a lot of grads coming to say, you know, your course was impactful, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to learn
Yeah.
about the SDGs as a framework. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes our work is not felt during the time that we're with the students. So just an important reminder.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Candy. And I think Alistair had mentioned how people don't know about the SDGs. And with what you're saying, I think I see a connection when students can take what you're teaching them and then asking other professors if they can integrate the SDGs into what they're learning in other classrooms. And that's a creative way, that's an innovative way of kind of passing on the message across to everyone. And I think that's very important and very key. And so I'm just going to also open it up to the panel as well. In terms of, there might be a number of people on this call who are just starting off in teaching the SDGs, and they're wondering how do they integrate the SDGs into their teaching, and how can they be innovative in their approach in a more general way. So I just want to get that sense from every one of you. How do you start from? Where do you start from in teaching the SDGs, integrating the SDGs, and also being creative and being innovative about the whole approach? So I think this time I'll start with you, Aditi.
All right, sounds good. I feel like as an environmental ethicist, by my prior training, I think about a values framework.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. So thinking about what matters to me most. And then there's 2 other Ps. There's personally and professionally. So taking those 5 Ps and saying, which one of those domains do I think I live in, or do I think I contribute to in a personal manner, in a professional manner? That's really worked well for me in my role in supporting educators who are in the teacher-scholar model of being both researcher and educator. So saying, where do I make an impact? And then being able to align with some of those targets and indicators and the Canadian actions. There's a Canadian framework for this. So look at the Canadian actions to find that balance between what you're teaching, what you're researching, and where do you want your students to grow with that. That would be my advice to start. And I have an open textbook as well that folks can take a look at later.
Thank you, Aditi. Candy, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I would say start small. Again, like I'd like to think that we're always experts in learning, that the learning doesn't stop. So thinking about the unlikely partnerships, but at the same time, the natural alliances between the SDGs and your discipline. Where are the easy wins? Because the easy wins will help you carry that momentum. Aditi, you're part of a fellowship. So, getting a community of practice is key. So KPU has an open pedagogy fellowship on the SDGs, and it's how I, as an arts and humanities instructor, got acquainted with it, even though I wasn't identifying with the SDGs in the very first place. I love the idea in involving students if possible and give them the choice to choose their favorite SDG to focus on. And then finally, I think, Julia, looking at the Q&A, there's a question about the emotive, the effective domains. This is heavy work. The more we learn about the SDGs, the more sometimes it can be very daunting because these are big global goals. I've got students coming back to say, I feel like I'm one person. What can I do to make a difference?
Yeah.
And then I kind of see them moving towards the trajectory of one person can make a difference, but if I rally other people in my work, at my community, so both at the professional and community domains, your influence will be amplified. So that's kind of the trajectory that you want to get to. So addressing the emotions that come with this and letting them know that it's okay, we're all part of this.
Thank you, Candy. And as you said, I think joining a lot of community of practices also help. And SDSM also hosts a teaching community of practice where we kind of share ideas and give people who are just starting off resources and other approaches that they can integrate in their classroom. And so, Alistair, in your classroom, how did you start off teaching? How did you start off teaching on the SDGs? I would like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I've been teaching for 30 years, so the MDGs and then the SDGs. One comment I would say, and this I think builds on something that I think it was Aditi mentioned, scaffolding. The way I try to talk to students and the way I try to think about planning within a course and across different years, second year, third year, fourth year as an undergraduate, is I try to have an arc, and I'll talk to the students. And I think, Shamti, you mentioned this, opening up your syllabus. I talk to the students each year about in second year, this is what we're going to do. This is how from week 1 to week 12, because they often don't even check 2 weeks ahead of themselves what's next. This is where we're beginning, where we want to end. This is what the journey is. This is the learning arc in terms of content and in terms of skills. So what are the SDGs? How are they organized? How are they negotiated? And then as I take them through different topics, always connecting in the readings, at least one of 2 or 3 readings will be SDG focused on that topic. So within the second year course, it'll be that. The third year, I assume they've done second year. My third year course is global governance. So I will look at the UN and the SDGs. My fourth year is international human rights law and global governance. So I'll take international human rights law as a framework for looking at different SDGs and asking them, as I mentioned before, to pick a country, pick a voluntary national review, pick an SDG about it, take a role and tell me what you think. Write a policy brief from that perspective about these. So my thought would be have an arc within 1 year, have an arc across multiple years, and keep talking to the students all the time about that. Because what they don't think is, if I was a professor, how would I do this? And why would I do this? And I keep asking them to do that. Figure out why I'm doing it this way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alistair. So Shamter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that has been said so far. I would say to start with, get to know the goals a little bit, the targets and indicators. And if you do feel overwhelmed with the 17 goals and the depth of the framework, picking one is not a bad idea because, like Candy suggested, they connect to other goals regardless. So it doesn't really matter if you just start with 1 or 2 or all of them. Sometimes the triple threat, the biodiversity, climate change, pollution, that angle could really work well with the SDGs. And I've tried that once, but I usually do a kind of an introductory of the framework, introductory workshop or a lesson on that for students to really get acquaintance with the goals. I would say also, like, if you're just getting started, and I do that often in my teaching, is bringing experts, bringing others, faculty members or staff, or even students who already are working in the space, and bringing them to your classroom, because I learn a lot and students learn a lot, and then I adapt my teaching because I've learned so much from them. And then just last point of this kind of really I think Candy said this, that there's a lot of anxiety or emotions that come with this work, or just knowing the goals and how the goals are doing. So normalizing those emotions and really taking those values perspective has worked well in my own teaching. So one of the new frameworks that I'm working on is called Climate Kind Pedagogy, and really bringing those kindness informed pedagogies into your learning and teaching really helps and build that connection, that relationship. And Aditi talked about relationships. Really, it emphasizes the relationship and building that community of learning in your classroom.
Thank you for that, Shamter. And I think recognizing also that every student is different, there are various backgrounds in the classroom, and just building up that connection with them, from the problems, from their backgrounds, and just trying to bring out that connection is quite important. Rosalind, do you have any take on this?
Yeah, such an incredible collection of wisdom we have here. Some amazing educators. I would say, if you're new to the goals, or your students are new to the goals, find out what they know first. So what's familiar to them? I mean, no poverty, life on land, life underwater. We can relate to these things. They're not necessarily alien. And so look at the underlying dilemmas and issues that they're addressing. Yes, the goals have an agenda. They go to 2030. That's true. But these issues are perennial. They're not going to disappear in 2030. So don't worry so much about getting through them all, and sort of, are we covering everything? Stick to 1 or 2 things that you feel really comfortable doing in the classroom. things that are tried and tested and true, and it might take a while to find out what those are. And also just to conclude, I would say always explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. So if students are saying, why are we studying the SDGs? Think about what the underlying purpose is that you are trying to convey. What are the learning goals that you're trying to convey and that you hope that they will learn? And why you are bringing it into the classroom. Why are you doing it in this particular way when it could be done another way? And think about what your own rationale is. And I think that goes a long way with students. It really helps them, it really brings them on board.
Thank you, Rosalina. I think it's important why we're learning about the SDGs, explaining it really does go a long way. And I think we have time for just one or two more questions, and I'm going to pretty much open up to anyone. And it says that when teaching about the SDGs, there's a cognitive domain and thinking skills. What role do you think the effective domain in terms of values, beliefs, and emotions play while teaching the SDGs? Anyone can take a go.
I would say, I would just quickly add that a huge role. I think the affective domain should come first because cognitive is kind of built upon it. So I talked about the climate kind pedagogy, and that's effectively built on kind of really realizing the affective domain, the powers that exist within that, and kind of really bringing in the conversation around values and explicit conversations about values. And in transformative learning theory, there's a talk about objectifying what is subjective. So a lot of the times our values, our assumptions, our beliefs are very subjective part of our being. And the idea is to really objectify them and observe them. So explicit conversation about values and perspectives and assumptions. And I have a few examples, and I'm happy to share with whoever is interested that I do in my own classroom. And that's part of the climate kind pedagogy framework that I think it's really, really important. And I would add that about 97% of the students that I have interacted with have never had any conversation about values in their academic life. And that's a problem in education. And I think we really need to bring that back into education.
Thank you for that, Shanter, and the importance of bringing value back into education. And in terms of, does anyone want to share any experience with students wanting to make a connection with the SDGs, the competencies being on workplace ready? So how do they get workplace ready in terms of the competencies they learn in the classroom, and how can they transfer those skills into their workplace? Does anyone have any interesting experience they'd like to share?
I can share a little bit. And thanks for the question, Tracy. We developed a community engaged learning project last year. And so we looked for community partners that were working on sustainability and that wanted students for a short 30 to 40 hour placement. And we specifically chose that because we wanted to access students who didn't have opportunities like co-op or internship, who had family responsibilities, who had other pressures on their life that meant that they couldn't do those kinds of learnings. So short placements that they could receive a bursary for doing this work, 30 to 40 hours. And then there were opportunities to reflect, share, act. So reflection, that there would be opportunities to share what they had learned with others and to also act towards sustainability. And so they identified their SDG for themselves that they felt was most important in a personal context and a professional context. And then they worked through our 6 competencies that I've articulated kind of briefly here, but they're in the book. And they worked through those competencies before, during, and after the experience to think through, what did I already know? What do I now know? I used to think, now I think, those kind of prompts. So that's a very short summary, but community engaged learning aligned with the SDGs is possible. And there are other universities doing a great job of this, like Brock University. So lots of us are happy to chat about it further.
Thank you, Aditi. And I think that should be a motto across all of our classrooms: reflect, share, act. I think that's something we can definitely adopt. So it has been a great session. It has been very interesting. I've definitely learned a lot. We have come to the end of the session today, and I want to say a very big thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. I'm just going to also state that for any question that hasn't been answered, we'll definitely be reaching out in the follow-up email to answer any of the questions that we haven't had the time to take today. And we'll also be sharing links and resources that the panelists think would be quite useful to you as an educator as well in the follow-up email, as well as the recording. So thank you so much to all panelists. Thank you so much to all our audience. And just a quick follow-up, since it's the SDG week, there are the various activities across campuses in Canada, and just to highlight a few, you can choose to join these panel sessions on importance of sustainability education in creating a resilient workforce. That's on Friday, March the 10th, and I can also share the link with you after this session. We also have another panel session on Friday the 10th as well on emotions and saving the planet. So if you've really been thinking about emotional resources we need to put into technological, scientific, and economic tools towards climate action, do consider joining that panel session. And I'm sure it's going to be an interesting conversation as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the participants. And yes, we look forward to hearing more of the great work you're doing on your campus during the SDG week. Don't forget to post and like and share your activities on your campus using the hashtag SDG Week Canada. And yes, hope to see you all very soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank
Hi,
you,
everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.